The freezing cold wind blows across the barren land. In the distance, you can see some wild horses trying to keep warm by huddling together. A lone wolf is watching them from afar, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The winter in this part of the world is harsh and unforgiving, but there's no place that this determined wolf would rather be. This is his home and he knows every inch of it. Hi, and welcome to life in the freezing steppe. Today we will take a closer look at one of the most extreme biomes on Earth, the frozen desert. No trees, little snow and a lot of ice. That is what defines this biome. But life somehow still manages to thrive here. The frozen steppe is mainly found in two places on Earth. In the central part of Asia and in the eastern part of Europe, more specifically in the southern part of Siberia. These are regions so remote that they are almost completely cut off from the rest of the world. For most of us, these places sound like a frozen wasteland with nothing living there, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, over 6 million people call this area home, even though the population density is very low. Most people live as nomads or shepherding their animals. They live in yurts and travel with their herds wherever there is food. Sometimes entire villages travel together. These villages consist of extended families that have been together for generations. The climate in this region is really something else. Summers are short and mild, with temperatures averaging around 18 degrees Celsius. Winters, however, can be brutal, with temperatures dropping well below -30. It doesn't snow a lot here. On average, only 4 inches of snow fall each year. Because of this, the water in the rivers doesn't freeze all the way to the bottom. Only the top layer freezes over and this forms a crust of ice. Underneath the surface, the water is still liquid. When the sun shines, the ice melts just enough for small ponds to form. These meltwater ponds are oases in the sea of ice, and they attract a lot of wildlife. All kinds of ducks, swans and geese come here to feed. Also, the local horses, deer and antelopes come here to drink. This makes these patches of open water a prime spot for predators. Wolves, foxes and birds of prey wait patiently for an unsuspecting animal to get too close and then they pounce. The locals use these meltwater ponds as well. They come here to fish and sometimes even to bathe. During summer, the temperature rises above 0 degrees Celsius and the permafrost thaws. This makes traveling across the steppe possible. During the rest of the year, the ground is covered in a thick layer of ice, called permafrost, which can be up to 5 meters thick. This means that not even the smallest plant can grow here. If you want to dig a hole to put a fence post in the ground, you will need explosives. Apart from a few hardy plants that can grow in these conditions, there isn't much vegetation to be found. The landscape is mainly flat with rolling hills and a few small rivers running through it. The largest river in this area is Obi, which runs through the southern part of Siberia. The rivers that run through this area don't freeze all the way through, but the water does slow down considerably. This creates the perfect environment for fish like the Siberian sturgeon to lay their eggs. These fish can live up to 150 years old and can grow up to 12 feet long. This makes them one of the longest living and largest freshwater fish in the world. There aren't many predators in the water though. Most fish stay small because there's not a lot of food in the water. That's why the fish that do grow large eat other fish, including endangered species of salmon that swim upstream to lay their eggs. Some fish species in this area have adapted to survive without much oxygen in the water. This happens because the water under the ice doesn't circulate. When this is the case, oxygen can't dissolve in the water. Fish, such as the Arctic grayling, have special gills that allow them to absorb oxygen from the air. Other fish simply slow down their metabolism to match the slow pace of life in the frozen waters. Some fish species, such as the Siberian sculpin, burrow holes in the ice to breathe. They make these holes during summer when the ice has just melted. The hole stays open throughout the autumn. When winter comes and the hole freezes over, the fish start breathing. Through the ice, whenever the sun shines, the ice melts just enough for the fish to take a gulp of air. After that, they go back down to their burrows until the next time the sun shines. As you can probably imagine, the lack of oxygen in the water also affects the larger animals that drink from these rivers. Every now and then, you can see mammals swimming in the river, but they don't stay underwater for long. Mammals need a lot of oxygen to survive. That's why most mammals stick to land. Here you can find mammals like the great gerbil. These chubby rodents live in underground burrows that can be up to 65 feet long. Their fur is thick and soft, so they can withstand the cold winters. They spend their days looking for food and their nights sleeping with their family in their cozy burrows. They eat mostly plants, but occasionally they also feast on eggs and baby animals. When you think about the freezing steppe, you probably imagine lots of snow. This is not the case, though, on average, only 4 inches of snow falls each year. The reason for this is that the Siberian mountain range acts as a barrier, blocking the moist air from the oceans. This means that there's almost no precipitation. Even when it snows, the snow doesn't last long. The cold wind quickly blows it away. That's why most trees have a hard time growing here. Even the hardiest tree species cannot survive the strong winds and the dry air. This means that most of the year the landscape is bare and lifeless. But even in these barren conditions, life finds a way to thrive. Plants such as lichens, mosses, and small flowering plants can survive here. These plants have shallow roots or don't have roots at all. This way they don't have to dig through the thick layer of ice to reach the water. Animals such as the great gerbil, gerbils and pikas use these plants for food. The gerbils are mouse-sized mammals that spend most of their time jumping around on rocks. Pikas look kind of like dwarf goats and are related to rabbits. They can be found on rocky hillsides where they use their large claws to jump between rocks. Both animals are perfectly adapted to live in these harsh conditions. When night falls, the temperature drops rapidly and a thick layer of frost covers the ground. This means that the animals that are active during the day have to slow down considerably. Most animals sleep during the day to conserve energy and are most active at dawn and dusk. This is the time when the temperature is at its mildest, and there is still some daylight left. The main predator that the steppe dwellers have to fear is the wolf. Wolves hunt in packs and have excellent senses to detect their prey. They have thick fur that protects them from the cold and webbed paws that help them walk on snow. All of this makes them perfectly adapted for hunting in the frozen steppe. So if you ever visit this remote area of the world, beware of wolves. Apart from the wolf, there are also a few other predators. There are foxes that prowl the landscape at night looking for prey, and the Siberian eagle hunts both during the day and the night. These large eagles are one of the top predators in this area, and their eyesight is so good that they can spot a rabbit from half a mile away. They can also dive at speeds of up to 200 miles per hour to catch their prey. As you can see, this biome may not look like it, but it is full of life. From the smallest insect to the largest eagle, all creatures play a role in keeping this ecosystem thriving. So next time you hear someone say that there is nothing living in the frozen steppe, you'll know better. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. See you next time. When we think of Genghis Khan, we picture a brutal killer riding a horse across the steppes of Central Asia. And while that is an accurate image, what made him famous was his ability to unite all of the nomadic tribes in Mongolia and form the largest contiguous land-based empire in history. In fact, he had to become the leader of his people first, before he could go on to conquer everything. So how did a man who was exiled from his homeland become the unifier of the Mongols? Welcome to my channel. Today we're asking the question, who really killed Genghis Khan? As with many historical figures, there are two main stories about how Genghis Khan came to power. The one most commonly told is that he slew his brother and then took over the tribe. But when you look into it deeper, you find out that that story is actually a lie. Temujin was born around 1162 in the Kentai region of Mongolia. Back then, Mongolia was not a single tribe, but instead a loose confederation of tribes that were constantly fighting each other for dominance. Temujin's father was Yasuge, the leader of the Borgajit clan of the Mongol tribe. But since there was no overall leader, Yasuge was technically just a member of a clan within a tribe within a confederation. That meant that Temujin and his family were often on the move from place to place to avoid conflict with neighboring clans. When Temujin was 9 years old, his father was poisoned by rivals at a meeting. Temujin's mother, Holland, then took charge and led her family group, which included her husband's brother and his family, Temujin's uncle and his family, plus Temujin and his 9 siblings, through a difficult period that lasted for several years. During this time, Temujin and his family lived apart from the larger group, and they had to fend for themselves. Temujin and his older brother Belgade hunted animals for food, and Temujin learned many skills that would later help him become one of history's greatest military commanders. Unfortunately, the family group was fractured during this time, and eventually the two branches of the family reunited with other Mongol groups, and Temujin and his immediate family were left alone in the wilderness. They were forced to live off the land, and Temujin developed his hunting and tracking skills to keep them alive. At some point, Temujin's mother married his uncle, which is where things get confusing because both men are called Yasuge. This has led some historians to make the assumption that Temujin's actual biological uncle died and so his father's brother took his place. That is not true. Both men were alive during Temujin's childhood. Eventually, Temujin and his family rejoined his father's brother and his family and the rest of their extended clan, now living under the name Genghis. Temujin found himself a wife, had a couple of kids, and started planning raids with his clan to acquire more livestock and plunder. The problem was another Mongol clan was doing the same thing. In 1190, tensions boiled over between the two clans and there was a big fight near the river An, and Genghis was almost killed, but managed to escape and hide on an island in the river with his pregnant wife and a couple of followers. His wife gave birth to his son Gershon while they were hiding on the island. Then later that year, Genghis's brother Belgude sent warriors to rescue the family. The clan had apparently decided that the risk of losing Genghis and his wife and child was too great, and they wanted to bring them back to the clan, even if it meant splitting the plunder. But before they could sail away to safety, the rival clan showed up and attacked the small group. It was here that the story that most people know about how Genghis became famous happened. Apparently, Genghis had been practicing archery for hours every day since being exiled, and he used those skills to fire an arrow through his half-brother Estrupt, killing him with their leader dead. The rival clan scattered and Genghis and his group sailed back to his clan's camp. Now this story might be true, but there are several problems with it. For starters, we don't have any contemporary accounts of the battle. We're not even sure if the event took place in 1190, as that date comes from a Chinese source that is known to be inaccurate. And third, a story like this fits nicely into the narrative of Genghis as a ruthless conqueror, but it doesn't necessarily fit with what we know about how he treated his own family members. There is evidence that shows that Genghis actually got along with his half-brother, and there is no reason to think that Belgudi would try to kill Genghis, especially considering that Belgudi risked his life to save Genghis's family. Besides, why would a skilled warrior like Belgudi allow himself to be attacked by an inexperienced archer like Genghis? Maybe something else happened. Maybe Genghis didn't kill his half-brother, but instead his half-brother died defending him, thus making Genghis the leader of the family group. Then again, maybe Genghis did kill his half-brother, but here's the thing, whether or not he did doesn't really matter. You see, after the fight with the rival clan, Genghis rose to become the leader of his family group, then the leader of his clan, then the leader of his tribe, then the leader of a collection of tribes, then the leader of all of the tribes in Mongolia, and once he unified the tribes, he was able to use his charisma, leadership skills, military tactics and brute force to expand his territory, crush his enemies and lay waste to cities and countries, all the way from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. He was responsible for the deaths of millions of people and for starting the largest land-based empire in history, which makes him one of the most successful leaders in history. So the real question is, what made him famous? Was it his bloodthirstiness or his ability to unite the nomadic tribes of Mongolia and lead them to victory against the Khwarezmians, the Jin dynasty, the Western Shaya dynasty, and pretty much everyone else who stood in his way? We know it was on his bloodthirstiness because he allowed prisoners of war to join his army if they agreed to convert to Tengrism, which was a Central Asian religion similar to shamanism, animism, and belief in a supreme sky god. In fact, his empire was religiously tolerant. He allowed followers of Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, and many other religions to practice their faith without fear of persecution. We also know that it was on his empire-building abilities or his military tactics, because there were plenty of other powerful leaders and conquerors throughout history. Genghis Khan was famous because he was a combination of all of these things. He was a brilliant military commander who used deception, trickery, and well-thought-out strategies to defeat his enemies. He was a charismatic leader who inspired his soldiers to push further and harder than they ever thought possible. He was relentless and determined, and he was absolutely ruthless when he needed to be. He was the perfect leader for the Mongols, and the Mongols were the perfect people for Genghis to lead. Together they conquered more territory in a shorter amount of time than any other empire before or since. What do you think? Did Genghis Khan slay his half-brother in single combat, or did his half-brother die trying to defend him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time. In summer 2023, Time magazine reported on the discovery of an extraordinary treasure in Mongolia. A team of archaeologists was searching for the lost city of Kakorum when they uncovered over 400 artifacts dating back to the 13th century. These included fragments of Chinese porcelain, bronze, mirrors, gold coins, and even a golden seal with an inscription believed to be the personal stamp of Genghis Khan's son and successor, Ogedei Khan. The excavations were part of a search for Kakorum, the capital of the Mongol Empire at its peak in the 13th century, founded by Genghis Khan after he united the nomadic tribes of the Mongolian steppe. It's considered the world's first capital city planned specifically for that purpose. But just like so many other ancient cities, Kakorum was abandoned long ago. Its location remained a mystery until the early 20th century, and despite several attempts to find it, the true extent of the site still hasn't been uncovered. One problem is that no one knows exactly where to look. The most popular theory identifies a possible location in the Orkhon Valley, but there are at least 4 other theories about where the city may lie. All of these have proven difficult to test because the region is covered by thick layers of sand. Archaeologists can't even see the ground beneath them, let alone excavate anything, so they've been forced to try more indirect methods of finding Kakorum, like dropping lead fishing weights or plumb bobs into the sand to see what they hit. If they feel something hard, then they know they're close to something buried underground. They've also used ground-penetrating radar, which sends electromagnetic waves into the ground and creates a 3D image of what's below the surface. This has allowed them to identify large structures without having to dig through all of the sand, though it can't always tell them what those structures actually are. Using these methods, the team identified a large structure beneath the dunes, but when they started digging, they realized it wasn't the kind of structure they were expecting. Instead of being a building or part of a building, it turned out to be a burial mound. They carefully excavated the mound and uncovered dozens of artifacts inside, including pieces of Chinese porcelain, bronze, mirrors, and the mysterious golden seal. While none of these objects belonged to Genghis Khan himself, his son's seal was enough reason to be excited. It's only the second one ever found, and it provided confirmation that this was indeed the right place to be looking. The discovery helped establish the location of Kakorum once and for all, finally allowing archaeologists to start exploring the ruins of this lost city. It's almost unbelievable that such a legendary city could remain hidden for so long. After all, according to history books, Karakorum was supposed to have been enormous, containing between 100,000 and 1 million people at its peak. That would make it one of the largest cities in the world. So where did everyone go? To answer that question, we need to understand how Karakorum managed to disappear in the first place. There's some debate about when exactly the city was abandoned, but historians agree it happened sometime during the 13th century, shortly before the empire collapsed in the early 14th century. As the empire declined, the city fell into disrepair and was eventually completely covered by sandstorms. Unfortunately for Karakorum, it was located at the edge of a desert, so when the climate shifted and the rain stopped, the wind began to pick up, carrying dust from China across the Gobi Desert and burying the city under tons of sand. In fact, it was these same storms that created the massive burial mounds commonly found across the Mongolian steppe, mounds made entirely of sand and wind-blown dust. But why does the discovery of a small treasure trove of artifacts near the burial mound indicate that they've found the right place to be looking? Why not keep searching elsewhere? As much as I love a good treasure hunt, I think I'd rather leave that kind of thing to the professionals. For one thing, archaeology is my favorite subject, and I'm a bit biased. But aside from that, it's important to remember that archaeology isn't just about finding cool stuff. At its heart, it's about learning things. Archaeologists aren't treasure hunters, they're scientists. And their goal isn't to plunder the past, but to study it. Every artifact tells us something about the people who lived hundreds or thousands of years ago, and when we put all of that information together, we get a much better understanding of human history. As for why I'm telling you about these discoveries now and not waiting for the academic articles to come out, well, that's because the real treasure here isn't the pretty little baubles that might end up in a museum one day. It's the knowledge that we gain every time we unearth a new piece of history. So if you're interested in the history of Genghis Khan and his descendants, check out my other videos about the Mongols. Thanks for watching. It's 1220 AD and you are exhausted after years of traveling across Asia. Finally, you reach your destination, the great city of Kakorum, capital of the Mongol Empire and home to its powerful Great Khan. You have traveled here under false pretenses, spying for the Chinese on behalf of their emperor. But now that you've made it, what do you do next? Are you ready to feast in the Great Khan's tent? Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to find out what life was like inside Genghis Khan's enormous tent. We'll start with the food, and then move on to some of the other distractions that awaited us there. As soon as we arrive at the camp, we can hear the sounds of celebration. The Mongols were known to love to party, and this wasn't just a small gathering of tents. This was a huge camp where tens of thousands of Mongols lived and worked, and it was also incredibly noisy. Historian Rashid al-Din described the scene when the Great Khan entered the field. When the tents were pitched, the men were engaged in sport and diversion, making merry with the bow and arrow, the spear and the ball, or wrestling or shouting and singing boisterously. As we approach the massive central tent, we can see groups of men wrestling in the open space. Wrestling was very popular among the Mongols and had even been an important part of their history. Wrestling matches were held at festivals and special occasions. It was believed that wrestlers who could defeat their opponents without falling themselves were blessed by the gods. They followed strict rules and the bouts could last up to 2 hours. One historian wrote that the wrestlers were at it all the time. Wrestlers may be seen everywhere practicing the different holds of this exercise, and the common people as well as the princes frequent the public places where those athletic feats are performed. Later, during the reign of Kublai Khan, wrestling would become one of the official sports of the empire. So if you wanted to become a Mongol, you better get good at wrestling. But not everyone was interested in wrestling. As we continue our way to the Great Khan's tent, we can hear the sound of drums and cymbals being played. A group of musicians is approaching us, dressed in bright, colorful robes. The Mongols loved music, and they enjoyed dancing almost as much as they liked wrestling. And these musicians were probably playing a type of folk music called ash, which was a type of singing and instrumental ensemble that developed in Central Asia and was commonly performed by nomads. As the musicians play, they sing songs about the strength and courage of the Mongols and their respect for their great Khan. They also sing of their travels and adventures, which must have been exciting tales for those listening. In fact, music was such an important part of their culture that many historians have pointed out that Genghis Khan had his own personal court of musicians, although it isn't known what kind of instruments they played or what sort of music they created. As we get closer to the center of the camp, we can see other tents being set up around a large open space. These tents aren't nearly as big as the main tent, but they are still quite impressive. These smaller tents are the homes of the Khan's close family members and retainers. Although the Mongols were nomadic, they did have some fairly elaborate tents that they used when they weren't on the move. These tents were usually circular and made from felt, a type of non-woven fabric that is still used today for everything from rugs to hats. The felt would be stretched over wooden poles that formed a dome shape, and the entire tent could be disassembled and packed up easily. However, no tent was more impressive than that of the Great Khan himself. It's finally in front of us now, the largest tent anyone has ever seen. It looks like something straight out of a fairy tale. In fact, it's so big that it's hard to imagine how anyone could have possibly built something like it. Well, it's actually not that difficult. All it takes is a lot of men and some simple tools. The secret behind these gigantic tents is the lattice work of wooden poles that are connected together with ropes. Once the frame is finished, layers of felt are used to cover the poles and create a thick, insulated wall. The entrance to the tent is covered with felt, which acts as a curtain to keep out the wind and rain. And the entire structure is supported by a central pole that is taller than any man. But the size of the tent is only one of its impressive features. It's also incredibly beautiful, with intricate patterns and designs that are hand-sewn into the felt. The colors are bright and vibrant, and the whole thing looks like a palace from 1,000 years ago. Inside, the tent is just as impressive, with ornate decorations and furniture. There are carpets on the floor and tapestries on the walls, and the bed is covered with silk. In fact, the entire tent is furnished like a palace. There are tables and chairs everywhere, and the Great Khan sits on a throne at one end of the tent. But this is no ordinary throne. It's made of wood and metal, and it's decorated with jewels and precious stones. And on top of it all, there is a canopy that is supported by golden poles. The Great Khan sits on this throne when he receives guests, and it's a symbol of his power and authority. But the Mongols didn't just use their tents for military purposes. They were also used for diplomatic missions and trade. When the Mongols met with foreign dignitaries, they would set up their tents in a special area outside the camp. This area was called the guest quarter, and it was where the Mongols would entertain their visitors. The tents in the guest quarter were decorated in a special way to show respect for the guests. They were also larger than the regular tents and could accommodate entire families. In addition to the tents, the Mongols would also set up a special dining area for their guests. Here they would serve food and drink and entertain them with music and dancing. The Mongols were very generous hosts, and they wanted their guests to feel welcome in their camp. The Mongols were also known to be very hospitable people. They believed in treating guests with respect, and they would often invite them to stay in their tents. In fact, Genghis Khan's wife Bort was famous for her hospitality. She would often invite travelers to stay in her tent, and she would make sure that they were comfortable. She would also give them gifts, and she would make sure that they had food and drink. The Mongols were also very generous with their food. They believed that it was important to share their food with others, and they would often invite their neighbors to come over and eat with them. They would also give food to beggars and travelers. The Mongols were very religious people, and they believed in helping others. They believed that it was important to help those who were less fortunate, and they would often give money and food to the poor. They would also help anyone who was in need, whether they were a friend or a stranger. You can probably tell that the Mongols were a pretty cool bunch. They were known for their bravery, their strength, their generosity, and their love of life. They were also very intelligent, and they were able to create a vast empire that spanned from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, the Mongols were also known for their brutality. They were very warlike, and they were not afraid to use violence to get what they wanted. They also sacked and destroyed many cities, and they killed millions of people. Despite their flaws, the Mongols were a fascinating people, and they left a lasting impact on history. Their empire was the largest in the world, and their achievements were incredible. They were also very different from other cultures of their time, and they had many unique customs and traditions. What do you think? Would you have liked to live in the Great Khan's tent? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. See you next time.